Jake Thompson sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the morning light filtering through the curtains. It was just another typical Monday. He had been through hundreds of these mornings, but today, something felt different. His body didn't feel like it used to. The stiffness in his joints had become a familiar companion over the last few years, but this was something new. He reached down to tie his shoes and realized how much effort it took to bend over. His back, once strong and agile from years of regular workouts, now felt like it had been carved from stone. A simple task, something he used to do in a matter of seconds, now required time, patience, and a deep breath. For the first time in years, Jake wondered if he was finally feeling the age he had spent so many years avoiding. He'd always known that time was coming, but it had arrived faster than he ever expected. "Is this what it feels like to get old?" he muttered under his breath, catching his reflection in the mirror. There was a time when his body was his pride, when his muscles were well defined, and his energy felt endless. But now, at 60, those days seemed like distant memories. He was still the successful entrepreneur he had been, but physically, things were changing, and he wasn't sure how to handle it. As he finished getting ready for his day, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted inside him. This wasn't just the usual aches and pains of aging. This was different. His body, which had once been the symbol of his hard work, now seemed like a foreign object, betraying him bit by bit. His clothes fit a little looser, his arms felt weaker, and the once bold energy he carried with him was starting to fade. "What if I can't fix this?" he asked himself, standing up straight, feeling the pull in his lower back. He shook his head, pushing the thoughts away. Jake was no stranger to challenges. After all, he'd built his career from the ground up. But this? This was personal. The very thing that had supported him for years, his body, was now failing him. He couldn't just ignore it. Suddenly, a thought crossed his mind, one that both startled and intrigued him: what if I could fix this? What if there was a way to reclaim his health, his strength, and his vitality, even at his age? He had heard stories of people defying the odds, of older individuals not only surviving but thriving well into their 70s and 80s. Why couldn't he be one of them? Jake was not one to sit back and let problems fester. He needed a solution, and he needed it now. The days of feeling sorry for himself were over. This wasn't just about vanity or muscle definition, it was about feeling alive again, about taking back control. A sudden thought crossed his mind: what did Elon Musk do to stay healthy at his age? Jake had followed Musk's career for years. The tech mogul was known for his endless drive and work ethic, despite being in his early 50s. But Musk was also someone who took care of himself. Jake had read articles about Musk's commitment to maintaining a healthy lifestyle, even in the midst of running massive companies. There was something about Musk's approach that resonated with Jake. Maybe he could learn from someone like Musk, who seemed to defy the conventional limits of age. He pulled out his phone, tapping on Google to search for anything related to Musk's health routine. As the results filled the screen, Jake felt a surge of excitement. This wasn't going to be a simple journey of wishful thinking. It was going to be a fight, a battle to reclaim his health and vitality. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? He thought, envisioning how he could eventually share his own story, his triumphs and his failures, in the hopes that others might benefit from his journey. But for now, Jake had a decision to make. He could keep going down the same path, ignoring the subtle, and not so subtle, signs of aging, or he could take action. He wasn't ready to fade into the background. He wasn't ready to accept that his best years were behind him. No, Jake Thompson was just getting started. As he read through the health tips attributed to Elon Musk, simple yet powerful habits like eating clean, exercising regularly, and getting enough sleep, he felt a spark of motivation. Maybe, just maybe, he could take Musk's advice and start reversing the effects of aging. The key wasn't in fighting time but in fighting the habits that had allowed it to catch up with him. Jake made a decision. He was going to take charge of his health, starting right now. But where should he begin? What would be the first step in reversing the muscle loss he was starting to feel? Would eating the right foods really help him regain his strength, or was that just another empty promise? Before he could dive deeper into the rabbit hole of online health advice, Jake made one last promise to himself: he would start small. No drastic changes, no extreme diets. He would learn, adapt, and make choices that worked for his life. Because if there was one thing Jake had learned throughout his years of business, it was that slow and steady wins the race. He glanced at the clock. It was time to get to work. But this time, he was taking a new kind of work with him, a commitment to his health. No more ignoring the signs. No more hoping the problem would magically fix itself. Jake Thompson was about to embark on a new journey, and he wasn't going to stop until he found the answers he needed. As he stepped outside, the sunlight warming his face, Jake felt a flicker of hope that this could be the start of something new. Something exciting. Something that would push him beyond the challenges of aging and into the prime of his life. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Jake Thompson had always prided himself on being in control. Control over his business, control over his finances, and for many years, control over his health. But now, as he sat in his office, staring at his reflection in the window, he wondered where it had all gone. How had he gone from a man with boundless energy and strength to this, someone who found it difficult to climb a flight of stairs without feeling winded? His mind wandered back to his younger years, when his body was his most prized possession. Back then, Jake was an athlete, an all-state runner in high school, a college football player with aspirations of going pro. But the harsh realities of life had a way of redirecting his path. After college, he entered the corporate world, and the dream of professional sports slowly faded into the background. The hours he used to dedicate to training were replaced by hours spent in meetings, conference calls, and managing a growing business. For the first few years, Jake managed to balance both, work and fitness. He woke up at 5 a.m., ran 5 miles, and then worked long hours at his startup. But with success came more responsibility, and his fitness routine began to suffer. Business trips, late nights, and constant deadlines started taking their toll. Over the years, the gym sessions became more sporadic, and the clean meals he once prided himself on were replaced by takeout and quick fixes. His body began to reflect this neglect, and slowly, the strong, athletic man he once was faded into someone more sedentary and tired. At 30, he still had the energy of his younger self, but by 40, he had to make adjustments. His joints ached after long hours at the desk, and recovery from a workout took longer than it used to. By 50, his metabolism slowed down significantly, and the weight started to creep on. At first, it was just a few pounds here and there. But now, at 60, the effects of those years of neglect were undeniable. He had muscle loss, a slower recovery rate, and fatigue that lingered long after the workday was over. Why didn't I take better care of myself? Jake muttered to himself as he gazed out the window. It wasn't that he didn't know the importance of exercise and healthy eating, it was just that the demands of life had always come first. Now, as he neared retirement age, Jake realized he had put off his health for too long. His business was thriving, his children were grown and successful, and he was surrounded by financial security, but he was physically worn down. The very thing that had supported him through the highs and lows of entrepreneurship was now the one thing holding him back. Jake had been a workaholic for most of his life, and his family could attest to that. He and his wife, Ellen, had been married for over 30 years, and their 2 children, Sarah and Jack, were both grown and independent. But despite the outward success, there had always been an undercurrent of regret. Ellen often joked that Jake was married to his work, and while it was said lightheartedly, it was the truth. He had sacrificed family time and his own well-being in the pursuit of success. Sarah, their daughter, had followed in Jake's entrepreneurial footsteps, starting her own tech company. She often called her dad for advice, but lately, she'd begun expressing concern about his health. "Dad, when's the last time you did something for yourself?" she asked one day during a family dinner. At first, Jake brushed it off, blaming his busy schedule. But now, he couldn't ignore it. His daughter's concern had struck a chord, and he realized that it wasn't just his body that needed attention, it was his entire life. He had focused so much on work, providing for his family, and building his empire that he had neglected the one thing that would ensure he could enjoy his success for years to come, his health. And then there was Ellen. She had always been the rock of the family, the one who made sure the household ran smoothly while Jake focused on his career. But Ellen wasn't getting any younger either. She had been a runner in her younger years, and they had shared many outdoor adventures before Jake's career began to take over. Lately, Ellen had been hinting at wanting to get back to those old routines, but Jake had resisted. He had made excuses for not working out, for not going on hikes, for not spending quality time with her in the way they used to. He didn't realize it then, but that was also an excuse he was making for himself. As Jake thought back on these years, he could see how easy it had been to push his health to the side. He had always been able to get by with a few hours of sleep, a cup of coffee, and the drive to succeed. But now, at 60, his body was telling him a different story. It wasn't going to be able to keep up with the demands of his mind anymore. His mind was still sharp, his business was still booming, but physically, Jake felt like he was falling apart. And the muscle loss? It wasn't just a sign of aging, it was a wake-up call. He knew deep down that it wasn't too late to make changes, but those changes would require commitment, dedication, and, most importantly, a change in mindset. He had spent so much of his life focused on what was visible, the financial success, the awards, the recognition, but now he realized that the invisible aspect of his life, his health, was just as important, if not more so. "I need to do this," Jake said, his voice firm. "Not just for me, but for Ellen, for Sarah, for Jack. I owe it to them. And I owe it to myself." He took a deep breath, setting down the glass of water he had been absent-mindedly holding. It was time to stop making excuses. He was done being the man who let his health slide while focusing on everything else. He was going to take charge of his body, just as he had taken charge of his business and his career. Jake had always prided himself on being resilient, but now, he needed to prove that resilience to himself. It wasn't about lifting the most weight or running the fastest. It was about regaining control, about rediscovering his strength, both physically and mentally. And so, with the determination of a man who had built his entire life from the ground up, Jake Thompson made the decision that would change everything. He was going to fight back against the aging process, against the muscle loss, against the wear and tear on his body. He was going to reclaim his health, and he was going to do it with purpose. As he stood up from his desk and walked to the window, he felt a spark of hope. This was only the beginning. The journey was going to be tough, but Jake was ready for the challenge. He wasn't just going to accept aging, he was going to defy it. And, in doing so, he hoped to inspire others to do the same. Jake's life had always been about overcoming obstacles, but what he was facing now felt like a personal battle, one that didn't come with the usual playbook of solutions. The muscle loss, the aches in his joints, the constant fatigue, these weren't problems that could be solved with business acumen or a quick fix. This was something much more insidious. This was the slow, creeping realization that time wasn't just passing by, it was changing him. He stood in front of the mirror one morning, examining his reflection. His arms, once sculpted from years of weightlifting, now looked weaker. His chest, which had always been firm and defined, had lost some of its shape. His legs, still powerful, were slower to respond. He had always prided himself on staying fit, but the signs were undeniable. His body was no longer his ally. A voice in his head whispered, "You're getting old. It's too late to change anything now." Jake dismissed it as self-doubt. He had overcome so many things in his life, financial setbacks, the constant pressure of growing his business, the failure of his first startup. But this felt different. His body wasn't something he could control with his usual strategies. It wasn't about outsmarting the competition or finding a new business model. No, this was about him, about what his body was telling him. The first few weeks of trying to regain his health were difficult. He had committed to a new workout regimen, one that started with simple stretching and light resistance training. But each day, Jake felt the limitations of his body more and more. His knees creaked with every squat, his back tightened with every lunge. His muscles, which once reacted with strength and grace, now seemed to resist him. "Why is this so hard?" he muttered to himself, lying on his back after another round of push-ups. His arms trembled, and sweat pooled at his forehead. He had barely managed 10 before his muscles gave out. In the past, Jake would have pushed through that fatigue, no matter how painful. But now, it was different. Every movement felt like a battle, and each time he tried to push harder, his body responded with resistance. Was this what aging felt like? Was there no way to turn back the clock? His frustration mounted as the days went on. He started to notice that his energy levels were still unpredictable, and the hours of sleep he was getting didn't seem to be enough. It wasn't just the physical toll that was getting to him, it was the mental toll. He had been so confident in his youth, in his ability to conquer anything, but now, each day was a reminder of his limitations. It was as if the world was reminding him that he wasn't invincible. One afternoon, after another long day of trying and failing to stick to his new health regimen, Jake found himself sitting at the kitchen table with Ellen. She was busy making dinner, the rhythmic chopping of vegetables a soothing sound in the background. She looked over at him, a concerned expression crossing her face. "How's it going, honey?" she asked softly, glancing up at him with a warm smile. Jake shrugged, rubbing his temples. "I don't know. It's frustrating. Every time I try to get back in shape, my body just shuts down. I can barely do anything without feeling like I'm on the verge of injury." Ellen put down her knife and moved closer. She knew him well enough to know that something was off. "Jake, you've always been so hard on yourself. You can't expect your body to respond the way it did when you were 30. "I know," Jake replied, exhaling sharply. "But I'm trying, Ellen. I'm really trying. It just feels like, I don't know, like I'm losing." She sat down across from him, placing a comforting hand on his. "Jake, you've already won so much in your life. You built a career from nothing. You raised 2 amazing kids. You don't need to win this battle in the gym. What's important is that you're trying, and that's enough. Your health is important, yes, but don't let this feeling of frustration take away from the progress you've already made." Jake looked at her, feeling the weight of her words. He had spent so much of his life chasing success in the traditional sense, more money, more recognition, more achievements, but in that moment, he realized that Ellen was right. Success wasn't just about business or accomplishments. It was about the quiet victories, like taking care of his body, being present with his family, and finding peace within himself. But that didn't solve his problem. He needed a way forward. A strategy. A solution. It wasn't just about doing more workouts or eating less junk food. It was about understanding what was happening to his body and finding the right tools to fight back. That night, as Jake lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he reflected on the frustrations of the past few weeks. It wasn't that he wasn't trying hard enough, it was that he was going about it all wrong. He had been looking for a quick fix, a one-size-fits-all solution, when what he needed was a comprehensive plan. He needed to learn how to work with his body, not against it. And then, an idea hit him. What if I could learn from someone who had gone through something similar? Jake remembered something he had read about Elon Musk, a man who was known for pushing the boundaries of human capability, not only in business but in his personal life. Musk, despite his hectic schedule, had made a conscious effort to improve his health. He had talked about how he prioritized sleep, exercise, and eating healthy, and even how he managed to incorporate these practices into his intense work-life balance. What if I could apply some of his methods? Jake thought. Maybe it wasn't just about lifting weights or following traditional fitness routines. Maybe it was about taking a holistic approach to health, focusing on diet, sleep, and overall wellness. It wasn't going to be easy, but Jake was ready. He had always prided himself on being adaptable, and now, he needed to adapt to a new reality. He wasn't giving up. He was just getting started. Jake woke up the next morning feeling more determined than he had in weeks. The conversation with Ellen had opened his eyes. He wasn't just fighting against time, he was fighting for a new version of himself. One that wasn't constrained by age or muscle loss, but one that could evolve, adapt, and thrive in a way he hadn't even considered before. But as he sat at his kitchen table, sipping his morning coffee, Jake realized that starting this new journey wasn't going to be easy. He couldn't just read a couple of articles or watch a few motivational videos and expect everything to change overnight. This was going to take time, effort, and consistency. It would require a complete shift in how he thought about his body and health. Jake opened his laptop, and after a few clicks, he found what he was looking for: articles, podcasts, and interviews with people who had faced similar challenges. One name kept coming up: Elon Musk. Jake had admired Musk for years, not just for his groundbreaking innovations in technology but for his ability to juggle a demanding career while still prioritizing his health. He found an interview where Musk talked openly about his health routine, which was surprisingly simple but effective: sleep, exercise, and a balanced diet. Musk had spoken about how these principles helped him manage stress, maintain energy, and stay sharp mentally, despite his exhausting schedule. That's it, Jake said to himself. This is how I need to approach it. I can't keep focusing on extreme solutions. I need to focus on the basics. He quickly scribbled down a plan, inspired by the habits Musk had adopted. The first step was to focus on sleep. For years, Jake had prided himself on working long hours and sacrificing sleep for success. But now he realized that without adequate rest, his body couldn't repair itself, couldn't regain strength. If Musk could manage to get quality sleep despite his high-stress life, then Jake could certainly make time for it as well. Next, he looked at his diet. For far too long, Jake had used convenience as an excuse. Takeout, quick snacks, processed foods, these had all become regular parts of his routine. But now, Jake knew that he had to fuel his body properly. He wasn't looking for a miracle diet, just better choices. Whole foods, more vegetables, lean proteins, and healthy fats. He also decided to cut back on sugar, which had become his comfort food in stressful moments. Finally, Jake knew that exercise would be essential, but it would need to be different from what he had done before. He couldn't just jump into intense training. His body had to adjust. He needed a more sustainable approach, one that focused on building muscle gently and progressively. He would start with light resistance training, combined with walking, yoga, and stretching. It was about creating a balanced routine that he could stick with. For the first time in a long time, Jake felt a sense of clarity. It wasn't about pushing his limits to the extreme, it was about consistency and smart choices. This journey was going to be different from the business ventures he had tackled in the past. This time, he wasn't working against the clock, he was learning how to work with it. The first week was tough. There were days when Jake wanted to quit, days when his body ached and his mind told him to just go back to his old habits. But there were also days when he felt a glimmer of hope. When he woke up feeling slightly more energized than the day before. When he completed a simple 20-minute walk without feeling winded. Those small wins kept him going. The first challenge came when Jake had to travel for business. He had always used work trips as an excuse to eat poorly, skip exercise, and stay up late catching up on emails. But this time, he was determined to stick to his new routine. During his flight, Jake brought along healthy snacks, nuts, a protein bar, and fruit. When he arrived at his hotel, he resisted the temptation to order room service and instead went out to find a local restaurant with a menu focused on fresh, nutritious meals. It wasn't easy, especially when he passed by fast food chains and tempting treats, but he stayed strong. In the morning, instead of going straight to the meeting room, Jake took 20 minutes to stretch and do some light resistance exercises in his hotel room. The sweat was a reminder that he was doing something good for himself, something he hadn't done in years. Throughout the week, Jake felt the weight of his new commitment. It wasn't just about the physical changes, it was about the mental shift he was making. He was learning to prioritize himself in a way he never had before. For so many years, he had been the go-getter, the man who did everything for his family, for his business, for his employees. Now, he was learning to invest in himself. It felt like he was finally beginning to care for the foundation of everything else in his life. By the end of the week, Jake was exhausted but proud. His muscles ached in places he hadn't felt in a long time, but it wasn't the painful, debilitating ache of overexertion, it was the ache of growth. His body was adapting to the new routine, and though he still had a long way to go, he knew he was on the right track. The moment of truth came when he returned home to Ellen. They sat down for dinner, and Jake couldn't help but notice the way his wife's eyes lingered on him. She had always been supportive, but this time, there was a different kind of admiration in her gaze. "You're looking better, Jake," she said, her voice warm. "I can see it in your face. How do you feel?" Jake smiled, feeling a sense of pride wash over him. "Better than I have in years, Ellen. Better than I ever thought possible." For the first time in a long time, Jake didn't feel like he was losing. He felt like he was winning, not just against the clock of aging, but against his own doubts and limitations. He was on the path to reclaiming his health, and while the road ahead was still long and uncertain, Jake had found the strength to keep going. He knew that this journey wouldn't be easy, but it would be worth it. Because this time, he wasn't just fighting to survive, he was fighting to thrive. Jake had been on this journey for over a month now, and the results, though small, were beginning to show. His muscles weren't quite as weak as they had been, his energy levels were slightly higher, and his mood had improved. But as the weeks passed, Jake found himself grappling with a deeper challenge than the physical one. It was one thing to transform his body, it was something else entirely to address the emotional and mental battles that came with aging. The more he committed to his new routine, the more he realized just how much of his identity had been tied to his physical strength. For years, he had been the man who could do anything, who could push through pain and exhaustion to achieve his goals. But now, that self-image was being slowly chipped away, piece by piece. One morning, Jake stood in front of the mirror, looking at the body he barely recognized. His reflection no longer showed the strong, athletic man he had been in his 30s and 40s. He was older now, with a few more wrinkles and less muscle definition. His chest wasn't as firm, and his arms didn't have the same strength. The gradual loss of muscle had made him feel weaker, not just physically, but emotionally. And that hit him harder than he had expected. Ellen was at work, and the house was quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of birds outside. Jake sat down on the couch, staring at the empty room. It had been a good day so far. He had gone for a walk, followed his diet plan, and even completed his stretching routine. But inside, he felt a storm brewing. "Is this it?" he muttered aloud, his voice rough. "Is this all there is now?" For the first time in a long time, he felt lost. The years of hard work, the sacrifices, the long nights of grinding to build his career, it had all brought him here. And yet, this new version of himself, this older version, felt so foreign, so alien. It wasn't just about muscle loss anymore, it was about losing his sense of self. The man who had once dominated in the gym, in business, and in life, was slowly fading away. His body was no longer something he could control with sheer willpower. The thought of this inevitable decline, this aging process, filled him with a sense of panic. Jake's phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a message from his friend Mark, who had always been a great source of support. Mark had always been the guy who pushed Jake to go harder, lift more, work longer. He was the one Jake had leaned on during tough times, and now, as he read the message, he felt the familiar weight of their friendship. "Hey man, how's it going? Miss our workouts together. Let me know when you're free. We should hit the gym again soon." Jake stared at the message for a long moment. The old him would have been excited to get back into the gym, to lift with Mark and push through the burn. But now, the thought of it filled him with dread. The gym was no longer a place of strength, it had become a reminder of his limitations. He typed a quick reply, "I'm good, just trying to stay on track with my new routine. I'll let you know when I'm free." But the truth was, Jake didn't know if he was ever going to be free from this battle with himself. As he set the phone down, a deep sense of vulnerability settled over him. He had always been proud of his resilience, of his ability to face challenges head-on. But right now, the challenge he faced felt different. It wasn't something he could conquer with strength alone. It was a battle that involved not just his body, but his mind, his emotions, and his self-worth. Later that day, when Ellen came home, Jake was still sitting in the same spot. She could tell that something was off. There was a heaviness to the air, an unspoken tension that hung between them. "What's going on, Jake?" Ellen asked gently, sitting next to him on the couch. "You've been quiet all day." Jake let out a long sigh, his shoulders slumping. He had always been the strong one, the one who had all the answers, but now he felt like he was grasping at air. "I don't know, Ellen. I thought if I just worked hard enough, it would get better. But I don't feel like myself anymore. I don't recognize this version of me. I've been trying to fight the aging process, but it's like I'm losing a part of who I am." Ellen reached out and took his hand, her touch warm and reassuring. "Jake, I can see the effort you've been putting in. I know it's hard, but what you're going through isn't about losing who you are. It's about finding who you are now. Your body might be changing, but your worth isn't tied to how you look or how strong you are. You've been so focused on what you can't do, that maybe you've lost sight of all the things you've already achieved." Jake stared at her, feeling a lump form in his throat. "I don't know if I can keep doing this, Ellen. Every day it's harder to get out of bed and stick to the routine. I'm scared that I'm never going to feel strong again." Ellen's eyes softened, and she pulled him into a gentle hug. "You don't have to do it alone, Jake. I'm here with you, every step of the way. And you don't need to be the person you were 10 years ago. You just need to be the best version of who you are today. That's enough." Jake closed his eyes and allowed himself to be held. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to feel vulnerable. The pressure to always be strong, always be perfect, had been a burden he hadn't realized he was carrying. But in Ellen's arms, he found something he hadn't been looking for, peace. Maybe this journey wasn't just about regaining what he had lost. Maybe it was about learning to accept the changes, to find strength in vulnerability, and to redefine what it meant to be strong. For the first time in a long time, Jake felt a glimmer of hope. The journey was far from over, but he no longer had to face it alone. And maybe, just maybe, this new version of himself could still be someone to admire. Jake woke up the next morning feeling different. It wasn't as if he had woken up to a new body or had magically solved all the emotional hurdles that had been weighing him down. But something had shifted. After the conversation with Ellen the night before, Jake realized that this wasn't a race against time or a fight against aging, it was a journey of self-discovery. The darkness that had clouded his thoughts for weeks seemed to have lifted, even if just slightly. It wasn't gone entirely, but there was a lightness to his step, an openness in his heart. He was ready to approach this new chapter differently, without the crushing pressure to meet impossible standards, without the need to return to some idealized version of himself. Jake had spent the last month obsessing over his body, his routine, and his perceived failures. But today, he was going to try something different. He wasn't going to force himself to follow every rule to the letter. Instead, he would focus on the journey, embracing each step and giving himself room to breathe. That morning, he didn't rush to get his workout in. Instead, he made a simple breakfast, sat down at the table, and just allowed himself to be present. He thought about his recent struggles and about the progress he had made, both physically and mentally. He was stronger than he had been before, even if the change wasn't as dramatic as he'd hoped. But strength wasn't just about how much he could lift, it was about how resilient he had become. As he sat there, Jake realized something that had eluded him for a long time. He had always been so focused on what he could do next, what exercise, what meal, what next step in his journey, that he had never really taken the time to appreciate how far he had come. The muscle loss, the struggle, the emotional battle, it had all been part of the process. Each moment, no matter how painful, had taught him something valuable. Ellen's voice broke through his thoughts. She had come into the kitchen, smiling as she placed a cup of coffee in front of him. "How are you feeling this morning?" Jake took a sip of his coffee and smiled back at her. "I think I'm finally starting to understand something. It's not just about fighting against time, it's about making peace with it." Ellen raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you mean?" "I've been so obsessed with getting my old body back, with trying to turn back the clock, that I've missed the bigger picture. Aging isn't something to fear, it's something to embrace. Sure, I'm not as strong as I used to be, but I'm still here. I'm still working on myself, and I'm still improving." Ellen nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "I'm proud of you, Jake. You're figuring it out. It's not about being perfect. It's about being real with yourself and giving yourself grace." Jake felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He had been holding on to a version of himself that no longer existed, and in doing so, he had been denying himself the chance to fully experience the person he was becoming. The fear of losing his old self had kept him from embracing the new version of Jake, one who was still strong, still capable, and still worthy, even if he wasn't who he used to be. After breakfast, Jake decided to go for a walk outside. He had been walking regularly, but this time, he approached it differently. He wasn't focused on how many steps he was taking or how fast he was walking. Instead, he focused on the sensation of his feet hitting the pavement, the rhythm of his breath, the cool morning air filling his lungs. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't in a rush to get somewhere. He was simply being, enjoying the present moment, feeling gratitude for his body and all it had given him. As he walked, he passed by a park and noticed a group of older adults gathered together, some practicing Tai Chi, others simply sitting on benches enjoying the sunshine. The sight of these people, who had clearly embraced their age and were moving in ways that honored their bodies, filled Jake with a quiet sense of awe. It occurred to him that aging wasn't just about decline, it was about adaptation. These people weren't trying to recapture their youth. They were living in their present moment, doing what they could to stay healthy, stay active, and stay engaged with life. And that, Jake realized, was exactly what he needed to do. When Jake returned home, he felt more centered than he had in weeks. He wasn't cured of his fears or insecurities, but he was beginning to understand that the journey wasn't about perfection. It was about learning to adapt, to make peace with the changes, and to find joy in the process, no matter how small the victories seemed. That evening, Jake sat down at his desk and opened his laptop. He wanted to research more about how people adapted to the physical changes that came with age, specifically focusing on the role of muscle health in later years. He found articles from experts who discussed the importance of consistent, low-impact exercises, like walking and swimming, to maintain strength as people age. He read about the importance of stretching, yoga, and even meditation to help manage stress and enhance flexibility. One article caught his attention. It was about how to balance strength training with cardiovascular health as you age. It focused on how muscles naturally lose mass over time, but that it wasn't a foregone conclusion. With the right exercises, nutrition, and mental approach, it was possible to slow the process and even reverse some of the effects of muscle loss. This was the kind of information Jake needed, the practical, achievable steps that didn't require him to transform overnight but instead focused on sustainable, gradual progress. Ellen joined him at the desk as he was reading. "I think you're starting to get it, Jake," she said, looking over his shoulder. "It's about small steps. It's about taking things one day at a time." Jake nodded, feeling a sense of calm settle over him. He didn't need to be perfect. He didn't need to have all the answers. What mattered was that he was taking the right steps. Slow and steady. For the first time in a long time, Jake felt at peace with his journey. The battle wasn't against his age, it was with himself. And as long as he kept moving forward, kept adapting, kept learning, he knew he would continue to grow. Jake awoke the next day with a fresh perspective, the kind of clarity that had been missing for so long. It wasn't about the race to get his old body back, or trying to prove something to himself or others. It was about finding a new rhythm that suited the man he was becoming, one that embraced the passage of time and allowed him to grow stronger in different ways. His morning started quietly, the early light streaming through the kitchen windows, the world still and calm. He poured himself a cup of coffee, taking a long, slow sip as he glanced out at the backyard. The weight he had been carrying for weeks, the pressure to fix everything, had lifted. Now, there was just today, and the opportunity to take small, intentional steps forward. Ellen had left early for work, but before she did, she had left a note on the kitchen counter. "I'm proud of you, Jake. You've got this." Jake smiled as he read the words. It wasn't just a simple encouragement, it was a reminder that he wasn't alone in this journey. She believed in him. She believed in his strength, even if it didn't look like it used to. Jake had decided that he was going to try something new today. He had always been a creature of habit, especially when it came to exercise. But this time, he wasn't going to obsess over hitting specific goals or following rigid schedules. Today, he was going to listen to his body. He would move, stretch, and exercise based on how he felt, not how much he thought he should be doing. After breakfast, he changed into his workout clothes and went to the backyard, where the fresh air felt invigorating against his skin. He started with a few stretches, feeling the tension in his muscles release with each movement. It wasn't a grueling workout or a strict routine, it was just him, moving in a way that felt good. For the first time in months, Jake didn't worry about the scale, the number of reps, or the perfect form. He just focused on being present in the moment. The small actions, stretching his arms overhead, doing gentle squats, lunging forward, felt like a new beginning. He ended his session with a short walk around the block, breathing in the morning air, appreciating the simple act of moving. No timers. No competition. Just a steady pace that aligned with his mood. When he came back inside, Jake felt an unexpected sense of accomplishment. It wasn't about how many miles he had walked or how much he had lifted, it was about how connected he felt to his body again. For so long, he had fought against it. He had pushed himself beyond his limits, only to face disappointment when his body couldn't keep up. But now, he was learning to respect it, to work with it rather than against it. Later that day, Jake met up with his friend Mark, the one who had always been his gym partner, his workout buddy, back in the day. They had been friends for years, but recently, their paths had diverged. Mark had continued with his intense routines, while Jake had taken a step back. It was a bit of a delicate situation. Jake hadn't been sure how Mark would react to his new approach to fitness. As they sat at a cafe, sipping coffee, Mark leaned forward, his usual enthusiasm on full display. "So, how's the routine going? I've been hitting the gym every day, you know. You should come by sometime. You can't just walk forever, man. You gotta lift heavy to keep that muscle on." Jake nodded, appreciating the concern in his friend's voice, but he also knew that his approach was different now. "Actually, I've been trying something new. I've been focusing more on balance, listening to my body, stretching, walking, and just moving more intentionally. I'm not pushing myself to lift heavy anymore." Mark raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "That's a big change. I thought you were all about hitting those PRs and lifting as much as you could. I used to be, Jake replied. But I realized that I was so focused on maintaining strength that I ignored the other aspects of my health. I was ignoring how my body felt, how it was changing. So now, I'm working on being more flexible, more mindful with my movements. It's about long-term health, not just short-term gains. Mark paused for a moment, digesting Jake's words. I get it, man. It's tough to shift that mindset. But I admire it. I know you've always been a bit of a perfectionist, so I think this is a good move. Jake smiled. Yeah, it's a challenge. But it's also kind of liberating, you know. I don't feel like I'm chasing after something that doesn't exist anymore. I'm learning to adapt. Mark nodded, his expression softening. It's important to take care of yourself at every stage of life, not just when you're at your peak. I get where you're coming from. The conversation continued, but Jake's mind was on the shift in his approach. For the first time, he wasn't just living in the past, constantly trying to catch up to who he had been. He was finally embracing who he was now, and who he could become. Later that afternoon, Jake did something he hadn't done in a while. He sat down and started journaling. He wrote about his journey, the fears he had faced, and the changes he had experienced. He wrote about the struggle to let go of the past and the hope he had found in the process. He wasn't done yet, he had a long way to go, but this new routine, this new mindset, was already making a difference. In the past, he had been so focused on pushing himself to the limit. But now, he understood that pushing didn't always mean more effort. Sometimes, it meant stepping back, reevaluating, and making space for a more sustainable, balanced approach. His routine wasn't about reaching a specific goal anymore. It was about maintaining consistency, about living well, about doing what felt right for his body, no matter the stage of life he was in. That evening, when Ellen returned home, Jake felt lighter, more at peace. He shared his experience with her, explaining how he was adjusting his routine and his mindset. She smiled and kissed him on the cheek. I'm so proud of you. This is exactly what you needed, an approach that honors who you are now, not who you used to be. Jake smiled back, feeling a sense of pride that came from doing something meaningful, not for anyone else, but for himself. He knew he was on the right track. Jake woke up the next morning with a sense of anticipation. After spending so much time focusing on his workouts, his mindset, and his emotional well-being, he knew it was time to turn his attention to something just as crucial, nutrition. He had always known that what he ate played a role in his health, but recently, he had come to realize that nutrition wasn't just about eating to fuel his workouts. It was about fueling his life, his body, mind, and spirit. And at 60, with his muscle mass gradually declining, it had become more important than ever to pay closer attention to the foods he was putting into his body. Jake had spent the last week reading about how aging affected muscle health, and what he found was both encouraging and eye-opening. Studies showed that while it was true that muscle mass naturally declined with age, certain foods could help slow down this process and even help rebuild muscle. Protein, for example, was vital for maintaining muscle mass, especially as you got older. But it wasn't just about eating more protein, it was about making sure that he was eating the right types of protein, along with a balanced diet that supported overall health. He had always been a meat lover, but as he thought more about it, he realized that his diet had been lacking in some key areas. He hadn't been eating enough variety of nutrients, and while he enjoyed his meals, they often weren't as nutrient-dense as they could be. He'd been focused so much on muscle-building exercises and routines that he'd overlooked the fact that food was just as powerful a tool in achieving his goals. Jake decided that today would be the start of a new approach to his nutrition. He would make more conscious choices about what he ate, prioritizing foods that would support muscle health, energy levels, and overall vitality. And he'd start small. No drastic changes, just one step at a time. After breakfast, he went to the kitchen and pulled out a few ingredients: eggs, leafy greens, avocado, and some fresh berries. These were foods that he had read about in his research, packed with nutrients that could help him maintain his muscle health. He whipped up a quick omelet with spinach and avocado, then added a handful of mixed berries on the side. It was simple, but it felt like a conscious choice, a step in the right direction. As Jake sat down to eat, he thought about how important this meal was. It wasn't just about the food, it was about the shift in how he was approaching his health. He wasn't looking for a quick fix or some magic solution. He was in it for the long haul, and he wanted to nourish his body properly so that it could continue to function at its best for as long as possible. Later that morning, he took a trip to the farmer's market to stock up on fresh, whole foods. As he walked through the aisles, he was more mindful of the choices he was making. He picked up a variety of vegetables, some lean meats, and a few nutrient-dense grains. The simple act of choosing these foods made him feel empowered. He was taking control of his health, one meal at a time. Back at home, Jake made a new plan for the week. He would focus on incorporating more lean proteins, healthy fats, and colorful vegetables into his meals. He also planned to try some new recipes that would support his muscle health, such as salmon with roasted vegetables and a quinoa salad with chickpeas. Each meal would be an opportunity to nourish his body and give it the building blocks it needed to thrive. The more Jake thought about it, the more he realized how important nutrition was not only for his physical health but for his mental health as well. The foods he ate could have a direct impact on his mood, energy levels, and even his ability to cope with stress. Eating better wasn't just about getting stronger, it was about feeling better, inside and out. That afternoon, Jake met with his nutritionist, Dr. Sarah, who had been helping him craft a sustainable eating plan. She was kind and patient, and she had a wealth of knowledge about how to support muscle health, especially as you got older. They talked about the importance of protein, but Dr. Sarah also emphasized the need for a well-rounded diet that included a variety of nutrients. Jake, the key is balance, she said, flipping through her notes. As we age, our bodies don't absorb nutrients as efficiently, so we need to be more intentional with what we eat. But it's not just about protein. You need to focus on healthy fats, fiber, and antioxidants too. These will help reduce inflammation and support muscle recovery. Jake nodded, absorbing every word. It was clear that this wasn't a one-size-fits-all approach. What worked for someone in their 20s wasn't going to work for him at 60. But with the right balance, he could still support his muscles and overall health. I've been reading a lot about foods that can help with muscle loss, Jake said. I keep seeing protein mentioned, but are there specific foods that are better for someone my age? Dr. Sarah smiled. Absolutely. Foods that are rich in omega-3 fatty acids, like salmon and flax seeds, are great for reducing inflammation and supporting muscle health. You also want to make sure you're getting enough vitamin D, which is crucial for bone and muscle function. And don't forget about antioxidants. Fruits and vegetables like berries, spinach, and kale can help fight oxidative stress, which can contribute to muscle breakdown. Jake took notes as Dr. Sarah continued, sharing meal ideas and even recommending a few supplements that could help fill any gaps in his diet. You don't need to make huge changes overnight, she added. But if you start making small adjustments, you'll begin to feel the difference. As Jake left the office, he felt a sense of clarity and purpose. Nutrition was no longer an afterthought, it was an integral part of his journey. He had always been willing to work hard at the gym, but now he understood that what he ate was just as important as how he exercised. The two went hand in hand, and when they were in harmony, they could lead to sustainable, long-term results. Back home, Jake felt inspired. He spent the evening prepping some meals for the upcoming week. He was excited to try new recipes, ones that would nourish his body and support his goals. He wasn't just focusing on the physical aspect of his health anymore, he was looking at the bigger picture. Nutrition was a key component in his journey toward strength, vitality, and longevity. As he sat down to dinner that night, Jake felt more connected to his body than ever before. He wasn't just feeding it, he was nurturing it. And that, he realized, was the foundation of true health. Jake had come to realize that the hardest battles weren't just physical. Sure, his body was changing, muscle mass was no longer as easy to hold on to, and his energy levels weren't quite what they used to be. But it wasn't just the physical shifts that had him frustrated, it was the mental challenges that had begun to creep in. It was the constant comparison to his former self, the voice in his head that kept asking, "Why aren't you stronger? Why aren't you getting better?" The struggle wasn't just about pushing himself to the limit anymore. It was about reconciling the man he had been with the man he was becoming. Every morning, as Jake prepared for his day, the doubts would come. It wasn't even about the specific goals he had, it was about the feeling that time was slipping away. That he had missed the peak of his physical prime and that he would never get it back. This mental hurdle was something Jake hadn't expected. He had always prided himself on being tough, mentally and physically. He was used to pushing through pain, ignoring discomfort, and doing whatever it took to get results. But now, as he moved into his 60s, the body that had once seemed invincible wasn't as forgiving. The emotional toll was real. It wasn't easy to face the fact that no matter how hard he worked, things were changing. His body didn't bounce back as quickly after a workout. He felt soreness where he never used to. His reflection in the mirror showed a man who was aging, and while he wasn't ashamed of that, it still stung at times. But Jake wasn't one to back down from a challenge, and he knew that the mental battle was just as important as the physical one. He couldn't let himself be consumed by fear, by doubts, or by the pressure to achieve something that no longer aligned with who he was. Jake had a conversation with Ellen about his feelings one evening after dinner. She had noticed the changes in his mood lately, his frustration, his restlessness. They were sitting on the couch, a glass of wine in their hands, when she finally asked, "Jake, what's really going on? I know you've been working hard on your health, but you don't seem happy. You're pushing yourself so hard, but it looks like you're not enjoying it." Jake looked at her, knowing she was right. He hadn't been enjoying it, not really. It had been all about results, about proving something. But he had been neglecting the process, the small victories. The truth was, he felt stuck. I guess I'm just not where I thought I'd be at this point," Jake admitted. "I used to be strong, you know. I used to feel unstoppable. But now, it feels like I'm just running in place." Ellen nodded. "I get it. But Jake, it's not about being the person you were. It's about becoming the best version of yourself now. You're not in competition with anyone else, not even with your past self. And I think you know that deep down." Jake sighed. She was right, of course. He had been so focused on his old version of himself that he had forgotten to embrace who he was now, and who he could be moving forward. The next day, Jake decided to address the mental hurdles head-on. He knew that overcoming them wasn't going to happen overnight, but it had to start somewhere. It wasn't enough to just change his diet and workout routine. He had to change how he thought about his journey, how he saw himself. Jake began incorporating mindfulness into his daily routine. It wasn't something he had ever really paid attention to, but he understood that to make real progress, he had to learn to quiet the negative thoughts and be present in the moment. Instead of beating himself up for not being as strong as he used to be, he started acknowledging his efforts, how far he had come, not just physically, but emotionally. During his walks, he focused on his breath, listening to the rhythm of his steps, feeling the connection between his body and the earth beneath him. He made a commitment to stop comparing himself to others or his younger self. Instead, he focused on what he could do now, and how those small wins would add up over time. One morning, after a week of practicing mindfulness, Jake was out for his usual walk. He had been listening to a podcast on aging gracefully and how the mind plays a huge role in how we experience the physical changes in our lives. The host had spoken about how a positive mindset could help slow the process of aging, making it easier to embrace the changes that came with it. Jake took in the quiet beauty of the morning as the podcast episode ended. It was a simple realization, but it felt profound. Age didn't define his worth. The way he approached life, the choices he made, and the mindset he cultivated, those were what defined him. That afternoon, he made a decision. He would stop focusing on what he couldn't change and start working with the things he had. His body might not have been the same as it was 20 years ago, but that didn't mean it couldn't still be strong and capable. It didn't mean he couldn't continue to grow and improve. It just meant he needed to redefine what strength looked like. He spent the rest of the day journaling about this newfound perspective. Instead of making a list of exercises or goals related to strength, he wrote down his thoughts about what he could do to nurture his mind as well as his body. He would meditate more often, learn to enjoy the process of working out instead of just focusing on the results, and practice gratitude for the small victories each day. By the time Ellen came home, Jake felt lighter. He was no longer carrying the weight of his past self, but instead, embracing the version of himself that was constantly evolving. He shared his thoughts with her, explaining how he was focusing more on the mental and emotional aspects of his health. "That sounds like exactly what you need, Jake," she said, giving him a warm hug. "You've always been so focused on achieving physical goals that you've forgotten to celebrate the journey. You're not losing anything. You're gaining more than you think." Jake smiled, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. His body had changed, yes, but that didn't mean he had lost anything. He was learning to honor the process, to give himself grace, and to embrace the beauty in every step he took, no matter how small. Jake's transformation wasn't just about his body, it was about reshaping his entire routine. With his newfound mindset, he realized that a solid, sustainable routine was the key to embracing his health journey at this stage in life. He wasn't looking for a quick fix or some shortcut to his former self. He was interested in creating a lifestyle that would support him for the long haul, something that aligned with his physical and mental well-being. It was time to get serious about consistency. He'd always known that routines were the backbone of success. But now, more than ever, he needed a routine that focused on balance, a routine that incorporated physical activity, mental health practices, nutrition, and rest. Jake's new routine wasn't about going to the gym every day and pushing his body to the limits. No, it was about creating a rhythm for his day that allowed him to feel energized and refreshed, instead of drained. The last thing he wanted was to overexert himself and risk burning out. This time, he was determined to take a more mindful approach. He started small. Every morning, he woke up at 6:30 a.m., just as the sun began to peek through the curtains. The first thing he did was a series of light stretches to loosen up his muscles. These stretches had become a ritual for him, a gentle way to begin the day without rushing into anything too strenuous. After stretching, he took a few minutes to sit in silence. He'd started incorporating meditation into his morning routine. It was something Ellen had suggested, and though Jake was skeptical at first, he quickly realized how beneficial it was for his mental clarity. The meditation sessions helped him center his thoughts and focus on his intentions for the day. Instead of immediately diving into the chaos of work or the gym, he took these few minutes to simply be present. The next part of his routine was the most critical, exercise. But Jake wasn't trying to go back to the intense workouts of his youth. He had learned that moderation was key. He wanted to preserve and build muscle without overdoing it, so he focused on strength training with lower intensity, combined with plenty of stretching and mobility work. He kept his workouts varied and aimed for consistency over intensity, lifting weights 2 to 3 times a week while incorporating cardio and flexibility exercises on the other days. Instead of intense hour-long sessions, he kept his workouts to around 30 minutes. This new approach kept him feeling fresh rather than fatigued. He was careful not to push his body too hard, understanding that the goal was to stay strong and maintain muscle health, not to exhaust himself in an effort to chase after his former peak. Jake also added some outdoor activities to his routine. He took long walks, often with Ellen, and sometimes went for short bike rides. These activities weren't about burning calories or pushing his limits. They were about moving his body in a way that felt natural, enjoyable, and restorative. The fresh air and the quiet moments of connection with nature were more important than anything else. The afternoon was when Jake dedicated time to nutrition. He made sure he ate 3 balanced meals a day, each one thoughtfully prepared with a mix of lean protein, healthy fats, and plenty of vegetables. He took his nutrition seriously, as he knew it was critical for muscle preservation and overall health. Jake was also mindful of what he drank. He had always been a coffee lover, but he had started limiting his intake to 1 cup in the morning. He replaced sugary drinks with water, herbal teas, and smoothies made with nutrient-dense ingredients. It wasn't just about what he ate, but what he chose to hydrate with that mattered. Keeping his body well hydrated supported his workouts, his skin, and his energy levels. In the evenings, Jake prioritized winding down. He didn't want to fall into the trap of late-night screen time or too much stress right before bed. Instead, he spent time reading or reflecting in his journal. As he grew older, Jake realized the importance of a good night's sleep. He made it a point to go to bed at the same time every night, ensuring he got a solid 7 to 8 hours of rest. In addition to his physical routine, Jake also began engaging in more hobbies and creative activities that had taken a back seat over the years. He started learning how to play the guitar, a passion he'd put off for decades. He found that these creative outlets helped him feel more balanced, less stressed, and more connected to the present moment. As the weeks went by, Jake began to notice changes, not just in his body, but in his mind. He felt calmer, more focused, and less frustrated with his limitations. The new routine was working. His muscles were maintaining their strength, and his energy levels were higher than they had been in months. His routine wasn't a set of rigid rules. Instead, it was a flexible approach that allowed for rest, recovery, and enjoyment. But the most surprising change? Jake started to feel genuinely excited about the process itself. It wasn't just about the end result anymore. The journey had become as important as the destination. The small victories, like making it through a workout without feeling exhausted, or choosing a healthy meal, were giving him a sense of accomplishment every day. One Sunday morning, after a leisurely walk in the park with Ellen, Jake sat down at a cafe with his coffee. He looked around, taking in the buzz of the world moving around him, and felt a profound sense of peace. He was content, grounded, and present. For the first time in a long while, Jake realized that he had built a life that wasn't just about chasing perfection. It was about embracing the ebb and flow of life, acknowledging his body's limitations while also celebrating its resilience. "You know," Jake said to Ellen as she sat down next to him, "I never thought I'd be saying this, but I'm actually enjoying this new chapter. I'm not trying to turn back time. I'm just trying to live the best life I can, right now." Ellen smiled, squeezing his hand. "And you are, Jake. You really are." Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? As Jake moved forward with his new routine, he realized there was one crucial aspect he hadn't fully appreciated before: the importance of rest and recovery. For years, he had pushed himself, believing that the harder he worked, the better the results would be. But now, after months of experimenting with a more balanced lifestyle, he understood that rest was just as essential as exercise, maybe even more so. Jake had been hearing it from experts: rest wasn't a luxury. It was a necessity. And yet, in his younger years, he had ignored this advice. He used to think that recovery was just an excuse for weakness. He'd been under the impression that muscle growth only occurred through hard, relentless work in the gym. But now, at 60, he realized that his body required more than just effort. It needed time to heal, restore, and adapt. Without adequate recovery, all the hard work would be in vain. The first step for Jake was learning to listen to his body. He'd always been quick to push through soreness, believing that pain was just a part of the process. But over time, he began to notice that this approach wasn't serving him anymore. He wasn't recovering as quickly as he used to, and his muscles didn't bounce back the way they did in his 30s or 40s. The soreness would linger longer, and he started feeling more fatigued than ever before. Jake's body was sending him clear signals: he needed to slow down. He needed to rest. So, he began making changes. One of the first things Jake did was integrate more rest days into his weekly schedule. Before, he had worked out nearly every day, thinking that this constant activity was what kept him in shape. Now, he limited his intense workouts to 3 times a week, leaving 4 days for active recovery. These recovery days weren't about doing nothing, they were about giving his muscles the time they needed to rebuild. On recovery days, Jake didn't just sit around. He took long walks in the park, practiced yoga, or did light stretching. He found that movement, even if it was low intensity, helped keep his body loose and flexible. His goal was to move without the pressure of pushing himself to new limits. These low-intensity days allowed his muscles to rebuild and regenerate, and he could feel the difference. His body felt less tight, more fluid, and far less sore than it had in the past. But physical rest wasn't the only form of recovery Jake embraced. He started prioritizing sleep like never before. In his younger years, he had often stayed up late, working on projects or socializing, thinking he could get by on just a few hours of sleep. Now, he understood that sleep was when his body did most of its recovery. He made sure to go to bed at the same time every night, and he aimed for at least 7 hours of uninterrupted sleep. Jake also realized that sleep wasn't just about the quantity, but the quality. To improve this, he implemented a new bedtime routine. He stopped using his phone or watching TV an hour before bed. Instead, he read books or listened to calming music. He dimmed the lights in the house and practiced deep breathing exercises to signal to his body that it was time to wind down. Soon, Jake noticed an improvement in his overall energy. He was waking up feeling more rested, more alert, and with a clearer mind. His workouts were more productive, and he felt stronger throughout the day. He didn't feel drained by midday like he used to. Instead, he felt fueled and ready to tackle whatever came his way. In addition to sleep and rest days, Jake also focused on mental recovery. He knew that emotional and psychological well-being were just as important as physical recovery. He made time to meditate, practice mindfulness, and engage in activities that allowed him to de-stress. Whether it was spending quality time with Ellen, enjoying a hobby, or simply taking a moment to reflect on his progress, these activities helped him recharge mentally. Jake also found that keeping a gratitude journal was a great way to refocus his mind. Each day, before bed, he wrote down 3 things he was grateful for. Sometimes, it was as simple as the fact that he had the energy to take a walk or that his body felt stronger than it had the day before. Other times, it was the relationships in his life, his connection with Ellen, his friends, or even the quiet moments he spent alone, reflecting on his journey. The mental clarity that came from gratitude allowed Jake to release the tension and anxiety that had built up over the years. He didn't carry around the constant weight of dissatisfaction or frustration anymore. Instead, he felt lighter, more at ease with himself and his progress. This mental recovery helped him approach his physical recovery with a positive outlook, knowing that rest and patience were just as vital as the work he put in at the gym. It wasn't just the rest days or the sleep that made a difference. Jake also paid attention to his diet on recovery days. He made sure to fuel his body with nourishing foods that supported his recovery. Protein was key, but he also focused on incorporating anti-inflammatory foods, like turmeric, berries, and green leafy vegetables, into his meals. These foods helped reduce muscle soreness and promote healing, making his recovery more effective. Ellen noticed the changes in Jake. He seemed more relaxed, less stressed, and in a better mood overall. She had always been supportive of his health journey, but she could see that this new approach was making a big difference. Jake wasn't just working on his body, he was working on his whole self, mind, body, and spirit. One evening, after a particularly relaxing yoga session, Jake shared his thoughts with her. "You know," he said, "I've always thought I had to push myself harder to make progress. But now, I realize that sometimes, the best thing you can do is rest. Our bodies are incredible, but they need time to repair and regenerate. I'm learning that taking a step back can actually help me move forward." Ellen smiled and nodded. "It's about balance, right? You don't have to be pushing yourself every single day. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is take care of yourself, body, mind, and soul. Jake agreed. He had learned that balance was the key to long-term success. It wasn't about overloading himself with intense workouts or trying to outpace the clock. It was about listening to his body, nurturing it, and giving it the time it needed to heal. Only then could he achieve true strength, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally as well. As Jake's journey toward better health continued, he knew that there would be bumps along the way. Despite his newfound understanding of rest and recovery, there were still moments of self-doubt. He was human, after all. Every now and then, he felt like the progress he'd made wasn't enough or that he wasn't achieving his goals fast enough. One afternoon, after completing a workout, Jake looked at himself in the mirror and felt an unsettling sense of frustration. His muscles didn't look the way they once had. They were stronger, yes, but they weren't as defined or as muscular as in his younger days. The reflection staring back at him didn't match the image he had in his mind. Maybe I'm just not cut out for this, he thought, sighing as he wiped sweat from his forehead. Ellen had noticed the shift in Jake's mood. Over the past few days, he had seemed quieter than usual, less enthusiastic about his workouts, and more critical of himself. She knew that self-doubt had crept in, as it often did during times of transition. She understood the struggle, how easy it was to fall into the trap of wanting instant results, especially when trying to rebuild something that had been lost over time. That evening, while they sat down to a quiet dinner, Ellen finally brought it up. "Jake, I've noticed you've been a little down lately. Is everything okay?" Jake paused, glancing at his plate. He hadn't realized how much his self-doubt had affected his mood. "I don't know, Ellen. I've been working hard, but it just feels like I'm not getting the results I want. I look at my body and think, is this it? I know I've made progress, but it's just not where I expected it to be by now." Ellen nodded in understanding. "I get it. But let me remind you of something, you're not trying to get back to where you were. You're creating something new. And that takes time. You've been consistent, you've been doing the right things, and I can see the progress. You're just looking for the results in the wrong way." Jake leaned back in his chair, letting her words sink in. It was true. He had been so focused on trying to regain the physique he once had, that he hadn't given himself credit for the changes that were happening in real time. His body was different now, stronger in some areas, more resilient in others. It wasn't about going back, it was about moving forward in a new direction. But that didn't mean the doubts would go away overnight. The following morning, Jake set out for his usual walk in the park, but his mind was clouded with uncertainty. He felt like he was in a slump, and no matter how much he tried to shake it off, the feeling stuck with him. Halfway through his walk, he stopped by a bench and sat down, staring at the ground. It felt like his mind was running in circles, telling him that he wasn't enough, that his efforts were wasted. It wasn't the first time he had felt this way. In fact, he had dealt with doubts like these many times in his life, whether it was in his career, relationships, or personal health. But now, with everything at stake, these feelings felt more pronounced. He couldn't afford to fall into despair, not now. Taking a deep breath, Jake decided to shift his focus. Instead of getting lost in what wasn't working, he would remind himself of all that he had achieved. He pulled out his phone and started scrolling through the photos he had taken over the past few months, pictures of his morning stretches, his walks with Ellen, his strength workouts, and even the quiet moments of reflection he had captured. Looking at these photos, he saw something he hadn't seen before, a journey in progress, not a failed attempt at recreating the past. The more he reflected, the more he realized that he wasn't where he had been before, and that was okay. He had moved forward. And while it wasn't always easy or straightforward, it was the only way forward. The journey wasn't linear, but that didn't mean it wasn't worthwhile. Jake stood up from the bench, wiping away a tear that had involuntarily formed in his eye. For the first time in a while, he felt like he could breathe again. He wasn't defined by how he looked in the mirror or by some outdated image of his younger self. He was defined by the effort he put into this new chapter of his life, the courage to face setbacks, the resilience to keep going, and the determination to grow stronger every day, regardless of the outcome. That evening, he sat with Ellen again. This time, instead of expressing frustration, Jake shared his thoughts with a newfound clarity. "You were right," he said, looking her in the eyes. "I've been focusing on the wrong things. It's not about trying to get back to what I was, it's about getting to where I want to be now. I'm learning, and I'm evolving. And that's enough. I'll take it one day at a time." Ellen smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "That's the spirit, Jake. And remember, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to keep going." Jake's setback was not just a moment of weakness, it was a pivotal point in his journey. In that moment of doubt, he found strength, not in pushing himself harder, but in accepting where he was, acknowledging the process, and allowing himself the grace to grow at his own pace. He learned that the road to true progress was full of ups and downs, and that it was perfectly okay to have moments of vulnerability. From then on, Jake promised himself that he would stop comparing his progress to some idealized version of his past. Instead, he would embrace the version of himself that existed in the present, with all the flaws and strengths that made him who he was. He was no longer trying to chase the past. He was building the future, one step at a time. Jake's journey toward regaining his health and vitality was far from smooth, but that was the nature of the path he had chosen. After the conversation with Ellen, he felt a new sense of purpose, though that didn't mean the doubts were gone. They would creep in every so often, like unwelcome guests in his mind. But he had learned to handle them better, to push them aside when they threatened to derail his progress. As weeks passed, Jake's physical transformation continued, albeit slowly. He felt stronger, and his energy levels were noticeably higher. He was getting used to the rhythm of his workouts and rest days, and his body was adapting. His clothes fit a bit better, and he could see subtle changes in the mirror, even though his muscles weren't yet as defined as he wanted them to be. One day, while Jake was deep into his workout, something unexpected happened that would forever change his perspective on his health and his journey. It was a Thursday morning, and Jake had just finished a set of squats when he felt a sharp, stabbing pain in his lower back. At first, he thought it was just a strain from the intense movement, but as the minutes ticked by, the pain only worsened. He had been careful to warm up properly and stretch before the workout, so this sudden discomfort took him by surprise. He stopped immediately, trying to walk off the pain, but the sharp sensation in his lower back persisted. "Not now," Jake muttered to himself, frustration mounting. "I've come so far." He limped back to the bench, his mind racing with thoughts of how this setback might affect everything he'd worked for. He had been doing so well, he didn't want an injury to derail his progress. But the pain was undeniable, and it was clear that pushing through it wouldn't be wise. Jake decided to cut the workout short and head home, where he would assess the situation. As soon as he sat down on the couch, he called his chiropractor, hoping to get an appointment as soon as possible. After explaining his symptoms, the receptionist scheduled him for an appointment later that afternoon. When Jake arrived at the chiropractor's office, he was anxious. He wasn't sure what to expect or how serious the injury might be. As he waited in the examination room, he couldn't help but replay the incident over and over in his mind. Was it just an isolated strain? Or was it something more serious? Dr. Matthews, the chiropractor, entered the room and smiled reassuringly. "All right, Jake. Let's take a look at what's going on." She conducted a thorough examination, asking Jake to move in different ways to determine the source of the pain. After a few minutes, Dr. Matthews sat back in her chair, her expression more serious than Jake had anticipated. "Well," she began, "I'm not seeing any obvious signs of a severe injury. But it seems like you're dealing with a muscle imbalance. It's quite common for people as they age, especially those who've been working out or pushing themselves hard without balancing things out properly." Jake blinked, trying to understand what she meant. "What do you mean by a muscle imbalance?" Dr. Matthews explained that, over time, the muscles in the body could become uneven, either because of improper training, posture, or neglecting certain muscle groups. In Jake's case, it seemed that his lower back muscles had become tight and overworked, while the muscles in his core and hips were underdeveloped. This imbalance was putting extra strain on his back and causing the pain. She continued, as we age, the body's natural ability to adapt to exercise and strain slows down. This means that without a well-rounded approach to fitness, small imbalances can become big problems. I know you've been focusing on strength, but we need to address the muscles that are weaker and make sure everything is working together. Jake's mind raced. He had always been focused on building strength in certain areas, his arms, legs, and chest, but had neglected the muscles that provided support to his spine and core. He had no idea that these imbalances were causing such damage, but now that it was laid out before him, he realized how much sense it made. I had no idea, Jake said quietly, feeling a mixture of surprise and concern. So what do I do now? Dr. Matthews smiled kindly. Don't worry, Jake. We'll fix this. But it will require some changes. We'll work on strengthening your core, glutes, and hips, and I'll show you some exercises to help restore balance. And, importantly, you'll need to give your lower back a bit of time to rest and recover properly. A little patience goes a long way. Jake left the chiropractor's office that afternoon with a renewed sense of direction. It was an eye-opening revelation, and although the pain in his lower back was frustrating, he knew that this was another challenge he could overcome. The truth was, the body wasn't a machine that could be pushed to its limits without consequences. He had been so focused on getting stronger that he had neglected the critical support muscles, and now it was time to fix that. The following weeks became an entirely new chapter in Jake's health journey. He spent time working on exercises that focused on strengthening his core, glutes, and hips. He also incorporated more flexibility exercises to keep his muscles long and supple. At first, it was frustrating. He felt like he was taking a step backward after all the progress he had made. But over time, the pain in his lower back started to subside, and he could feel the muscles working together more efficiently. Ellen noticed the shift in Jake's approach. "You're looking stronger than ever," she remarked one morning as she watched him stretch after his workout. Jake smiled, feeling a sense of pride. "I'm learning that it's not just about getting stronger. It's about making sure everything works together. Balance, recovery, and patience are just as important as strength." Jake had learned a valuable lesson that would shape the rest of his health journey. Even when it seemed like he had everything under control, there were always deeper layers to uncover. His lower back injury had been a wake-up call, showing him that his body needed more than just intense workouts. It needed a balanced approach, and a focus on the muscles that supported the ones he was trying to build. The pain was temporary, but the lesson would stay with him for the long haul. The days following Jake's chiropractic appointment were filled with new challenges and revelations. He had been forced to reconsider his approach to fitness, taking a more holistic perspective rather than focusing solely on building muscle. It was a humbling experience, but one that was necessary for his long-term progress. At first, he struggled with the idea of slowing down. It felt counterintuitive after months of pushing himself to achieve physical strength, to now shift his focus to rehab exercises. But slowly, the discomfort in his back began to subside, and Jake realized that this new routine was, in fact, helping him more than he could have imagined. He dedicated himself to the exercises Dr. Matthews had prescribed, many of which seemed simple but required immense concentration. Planks, glute bridges, and hip thrusts became his go-to movements. He also started incorporating stretching routines that emphasized flexibility, especially in his hips and lower back. One evening, as Jake was finishing his stretching routine, Ellen walked into the living room, her eyes widening as she saw the transformation in him. She had been there through the highs and lows of his journey, but now she could see the difference more clearly than ever before. "You look different," she said, her voice tinged with awe. Jake smiled, feeling a sense of accomplishment that went beyond the physical. "Yeah, I feel it too. It's funny, Before, I used to just think about muscle gains, but now I'm thinking more about how all the parts of my body need to work together. It's about balance, you know. Ellen nodded, impressed by his shift in mindset. I think you're on to something. It's not just about what's visible, it's about making sure everything is functioning properly. The conversation stuck with Jake for the rest of the night. As he lay in bed, reflecting on the changes he had made, it dawned on him that the journey wasn't just about regaining strength, it was about regaining control over his own body and mind. For so long, he had been caught up in a singular idea of success, the image of a well-defined, muscular physique. But now, he understood that true health and fitness came from a much deeper place. Over the next few weeks, Jake made an effort to balance his workouts with proper recovery. He learned the value of taking rest days, not as a sign of weakness, but as an essential part of the growth process. He allowed his body to heal, and in doing so, he felt more energized and ready to take on his next set of challenges. But not all the changes were physical. Jake noticed a shift in his mental clarity as well. His focus had sharpened, and he found that he had more patience with himself during difficult moments. The slow, steady progress he was experiencing gave him a sense of control that he hadn't realized he was missing. His doubts, which had plagued him for so long, seemed to dissipate as he allowed himself to trust the process. It wasn't just about the way his body looked, it was about how he felt inside. Then one day, a surprising invitation arrived in Jake's inbox. It was from an old colleague, Jason, who he hadn't heard from in years. Jason was hosting a weekend fitness retreat, designed for men over 50, focusing on wellness, recovery, and longevity. It was a small group retreat, and Jason thought Jake might be interested in joining. Jake felt a mix of excitement and hesitation. A fitness retreat? He wasn't sure he was ready for that kind of commitment yet. But the more he thought about it, the more it seemed like the perfect next step. It wasn't about muscle-building contests or competitive workouts, it was about learning more from experts, recovering, and finding new ways to maintain his health as he grew older. He knew that this opportunity would push him out of his comfort zone, but maybe that was exactly what he needed. Why not? Jake muttered to himself as he typed a quick reply, accepting the invitation. A few weeks later, Jake found himself boarding a plane to a remote retreat center in the mountains. The idea of spending an entire weekend focused on health and wellness, surrounded by people who shared similar concerns, was both thrilling and nerve-wracking. He had come so far on his own journey, but he knew there was still so much to learn. This retreat, he hoped, would offer a new perspective. When he arrived at the retreat center, he was greeted by a group of people who looked just as eager and uncertain as he felt. Jason, the host, was there to welcome him with a firm handshake and a warm smile. "Jake, it's good to see you again, my friend. This weekend is going to be all about learning and connecting. I'm excited to see what you'll take away from this." Jake nodded, grateful for the warm welcome. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he had learned not to expect perfection, only progress. The weekend was structured with a mix of activities, group discussions about fitness and aging, guided yoga sessions, strength training workshops, and lectures on nutrition and recovery. Jake was particularly drawn to the discussions on how aging affected muscle health and the ways in which strength training could still be incredibly beneficial, even into one's 60s and beyond. One of the lectures was by a well-known expert in aging and health, Dr. Laura Green, who spoke about the importance of maintaining muscle mass as we age. She emphasized how muscle loss, or sarcopenia, was a natural part of the aging process, but that it didn't have to be inevitable. With the right strategies, including strength training, proper nutrition, and rest, people could significantly slow down the loss of muscle and even regain some of what was lost. Jake listened intently, nodding in agreement with everything Dr. Green said. It was refreshing to hear this information from someone with such authority, and it reinforced everything he had learned on his own journey. By the end of the weekend, Jake felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had learned new techniques, met people who shared his experiences, and, most importantly, gained a renewed sense of purpose in his journey. The retreat wasn't about quick fixes or drastic changes, it was about sustainable, lifelong health. And that was exactly what Jake needed to hear. As he packed his bags to leave, Jason approached him one last time. "You've done great, Jake. The key is to keep going, no matter what. Fitness isn't about perfection, it's about consistency. And you've got that down." Jake smiled, feeling a sense of pride. "Thanks, Jason. This weekend gave me a lot to think about. It's not just about getting stronger. It's about getting better at taking care of myself." And with that, Jake boarded the plane back home, carrying with him not just the lessons of the retreat, but a renewed sense of balance and confidence. The next few months were a period of slow but steady transformation for Jake. After returning from the retreat, he had made it a priority to continue focusing on the lessons he had learned, chiefly, the importance of patience in his fitness journey. He knew now that the rapid gains he had once sought weren't the key to long-term health. Instead, his goals were clearer and more refined: to build lasting strength, maintain mobility, and nurture a body that could carry him through whatever life threw his way. Jake began incorporating new routines into his workouts, ones that balanced strength training with mobility exercises. He found himself gravitating toward low-impact activities like swimming and cycling, both of which allowed him to stay active without putting undue stress on his body. His back, which had plagued him for so long, gradually felt better. The pain was gone, replaced by a feeling of strength he hadn't experienced in years. Still, it wasn't just about the physical changes. As he continued to focus on his health, Jake found that the mental shift was equally as important. His days no longer felt dominated by frustration or impatience. He had learned to appreciate the small victories: the way his clothes fit a little more comfortably, the gradual increase in strength, the feeling of energy that carried him through his day. These were the things that mattered most now. One afternoon, while Jake was stretching after a particularly satisfying workout, he received a call from Ellen. She had been his rock throughout this entire journey, always there to listen, encourage, and remind him that his progress was just as much about the mental game as it was about the physical. "Hey, Jake, how's it going?" Ellen's voice was warm, and Jake could hear the faint sound of rustling in the background. "I'm doing great," Jake replied, grinning as he leaned into a deep stretch. "It's been a good couple of months. I feel stronger, more balanced. I'm not in pain anymore, and I think the new routines are really helping." Ellen chuckled. "That's awesome. I'm really proud of you. You've worked so hard. But I've got something to tell you, too." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Oh. What's that?" "You're not going to believe this, but I've been thinking about joining you," Ellen said, her voice filled with excitement. "I want to get healthier, too. I've been feeling like I need to make some changes in my own life. I see how much better you're doing, and I want that for myself." Jake's heart swelled with pride and joy. Ellen had always been the one offering him support, but now she was ready to take the leap for herself. It felt like a milestone in their relationship, not just as friends, but as partners in health. "That's amazing, Ellen!" Jake exclaimed. "I'm so happy to hear that. I can't wait to have you join me. We can hold each other accountable, push each other to keep going, and just have fun with it." The idea of sharing this part of his journey with Ellen filled Jake with a renewed sense of motivation. He had always been inspired by her strength, her unwavering belief in him even when he doubted himself. Now, he would have the opportunity to support her in the same way. The following week, Ellen came over to Jake's place to discuss the next steps. She had already signed up for a gym membership and was excited to begin training. Jake smiled at the thought of their shared commitment, knowing that this partnership would only enhance both of their journeys. Together, they mapped out a workout plan. It wasn't about pushing their bodies to extremes but instead focusing on longevity and recovery, ensuring they were both working toward sustainable fitness. They included stretches, strength exercises, and recovery techniques in their plan, along with an emphasis on nutrition. They also talked about how they could encourage each other to stay consistent, offering mutual support when the going got tough. As they talked, Jake realized something crucial: health wasn't just about the time spent in the gym or the number of reps completed. It was about the lifestyle. It was about making decisions that contributed to overall well-being, eating foods that supported recovery, prioritizing rest, and learning to listen to the body when it needed a break. After a few weeks of their new shared routine, Ellen's progress was already showing. She was gaining strength, and though she had just started, there was a noticeable shift in her confidence. She smiled more, carried herself with a little more energy, and seemed genuinely excited about her growing commitment to health. One evening, while they were sitting down for dinner after a workout, Ellen paused and looked at Jake. "You know, I didn't realize how much of this was about patience until I started doing it for myself," she said, taking a bite of her grilled salmon. "You were right all along. It's not about rushing to the finish line. It's about showing up every day and letting the small changes add up." Jake nodded, his gaze soft. "Exactly. I've been learning that too. There's no quick fix, just steady, consistent effort. And patience is key. That's the real secret." As the months went by, Jake's body continued to change. He was still gaining muscle, still feeling stronger, but there was something deeper happening within him. His self-esteem was growing, and the frustrations of the past seemed like distant memories. He had created a life that balanced work, health, and rest, a life that made him feel whole. The physical progress he had made was undeniable, but the mental and emotional shifts were even more profound. Jake felt empowered, not just because his body was stronger, but because he had learned the value of persistence and patience. Every day, he got better, not just in the gym, but in how he approached life as a whole. One afternoon, Jake sat at his kitchen table, a cup of coffee in hand, reflecting on his journey. He thought about all the obstacles he had overcome, the lessons he had learned, and the unexpected twists along the way. He had come so far from the man who struggled to get out of bed, the man who was unsure of himself and his place in the world. Now, he stood stronger, more centered, more in control of his own future. It had been a journey of rediscovery, of his body, his mind, and his spirit. And with Ellen by his side, he knew that the road ahead was full of possibilities. They weren't just working on their physical health, they were investing in a partnership built on mutual respect and a shared commitment to living life to the fullest. As Jake looked out the window, he smiled, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The work was far from over, but he had learned one of life's most important lessons: the power of patience. Jake had learned a lot about patience, consistency, and balance. His physical journey had transformed him in ways he had never expected, but no road to progress is without its bumps. After months of feeling stronger and more confident in his body, Jake was suddenly confronted with a setback that threatened to undo all his hard work. It was a Thursday afternoon when it happened. Jake had been lifting weights at the gym, focusing on his deadlifts and squats, when he felt an unusual strain in his left knee. It wasn't a sharp pain, but a deep, dull ache that seemed to radiate from the joint. He paused and tried to walk it off, but the discomfort didn't subside. His heart sank as he realized that he might have just injured himself. "I'll be fine," Jake told himself, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread. But deep down, he knew this was different from the usual soreness he was used to. He finished his workout carefully, avoiding any movements that would aggravate the knee, but the feeling lingered even after he left the gym. By the next morning, the pain had intensified. It wasn't enough to stop him from walking, but the limp was noticeable. He decided to take it easy and rest for a few days, hoping the discomfort would pass. But as the weekend rolled in, the pain showed no signs of fading. In fact, it seemed to get worse every time he moved. Frustration settled in. Jake had worked so hard to get to this point, and now it felt like everything was slipping through his fingers. He'd been so careful with his training, focusing on mobility and listening to his body, but this injury was a reminder that even the most disciplined approach couldn't prevent everything. Ellen noticed the change in him immediately when she saw him that weekend. She was in the middle of her own fitness routine, progressing steadily, but Jake was walking with a noticeable limp. His face was clouded with frustration, and his posture was different, slouched, as though the weight of the setback was already wearing on him. "What happened?" she asked gently, noticing the tension in his movements. "I don't know," Jake sighed, rubbing his knee. "I was lifting, and I felt something give. It's not a major injury, but it's bad enough to keep me from doing much. I was really hoping to keep pushing myself, but now I feel like I'm back at square one." Ellen stepped closer and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Hey, this doesn't erase all the progress you've made. You've been so consistent. A little setback doesn't mean you've lost it all." Jake smiled weakly. "I know you're right, but it's hard. I feel like every time I take 2 steps forward, something knocks me back 1 step." "I get it," Ellen replied, giving his shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "But remember, we're in this together. This is just another hurdle, and we'll figure it out." Her words were comforting, but Jake couldn't help but feel the weight of the setback. He had worked so hard to get stronger, to move past the injuries of his past. But now, he was dealing with a new challenge, one that could take him off course once again. Determined to stay proactive, Jake decided to visit Dr. Matthews, the chiropractor who had been instrumental in helping him recover from his previous back issues. The appointment was scheduled for the following day, and Jake hoped that a professional evaluation would give him some clarity. When he arrived at Dr. Matthews' office, the familiar scent of eucalyptus and lavender filled the air. The soothing atmosphere of the clinic put him at ease, but the nagging fear about his knee still lingered in the back of his mind. Dr. Matthews greeted him with a warm handshake and guided him to one of the treatment rooms. After a brief discussion about Jake's symptoms, the doctor conducted a thorough evaluation of his knee. She asked Jake to move through various motions, testing the joint's range of motion and checking for signs of instability. After a few minutes, Dr. Matthews sat down and looked at Jake with a thoughtful expression. "Jake, it looks like you've sustained a mild sprain of the medial collateral ligament, or MCL. It's not a serious tear, but it's enough to cause discomfort and limit your movement." Jake's shoulders slumped. "So, what does that mean? How long will it take to recover?" Dr. Matthews leaned forward, offering a reassuring smile. "You're going to be fine, but you need to give your body time to heal. I recommend resting for the next 2 weeks, avoiding any intense activity that puts strain on the knee. We'll work on strengthening exercises once the pain has subsided, but for now, you need to focus on managing the inflammation and giving the ligament time to recover." Jake nodded, though he still felt a pang of disappointment. 2 weeks. That's a lot longer than I thought. I was really hoping to get back to my routine sooner. "I know it's frustrating," Dr. Matthews said sympathetically, "but sometimes the body needs time to heal. This is a small setback, but the best way to come back stronger is by listening to your body and taking the necessary time to recover. Rushing the process can lead to further injury." Jake sighed but understood. "All right. I'll take it easy for now. But how do I stay on track with my fitness goals while I recover?" Dr. Matthews smiled. "There are plenty of exercises you can still do while you're healing. Upper body strength training is fine, and we can focus on mobility work for your other joints. But the key is patience. You've made great progress, and you don't want to undo all your hard work by trying to push too soon." As Jake left the appointment, he felt a bit more at ease. The road to recovery was clear, though it would take time. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he had already faced difficult moments in his journey before. Patience, he reminded himself, was a skill he was learning to master. The next few days were difficult. Jake reluctantly took a break from his regular workouts, substituting them with gentle stretching, upper body workouts, and walking. He also made sure to follow Dr. Matthews' advice, icing his knee and elevating it whenever he could to reduce swelling. But it wasn't just his body that needed recovery, his mind did, too. After weeks of pushing himself and seeing steady improvement, the sudden pause in his routine tested his resolve. Every day, he had to remind himself that this setback didn't define him. It was a part of the process, a temporary chapter in a much longer journey. Ellen, always by his side, reminded him of the progress he had already made. "You've come so far, Jake. This isn't the end. It's just a bump in the road. Focus on your recovery, and when you're back, you'll be even stronger for it." Jake appreciated her support. He knew she was right. In the past, he might have allowed a setback like this to derail him completely, but now he was determined to see it through. His journey wasn't about avoiding obstacles, it was about overcoming them, one step at a time. As he rested and recovered, Jake began to see the value in slowing down. It wasn't always easy, but it was necessary for long-term success. He knew this was just another chapter in his story, and the best was yet to come. Jake's knee injury was a humbling experience. It was one thing to deal with physical discomfort, but it was another to feel like he was losing his hard-earned progress. The first week of recovery was the hardest. Every time Jake looked at his gym shoes, or saw his dumbbells resting in the corner of his living room, a wave of frustration washed over him. He had worked so hard to get back to where he was, only to be forced to hit pause. But he had learned over the past few months that his body's needs always came first. And right now, his body needed rest. Despite the frustration, Jake did his best to follow Dr. Matthews' advice. He stuck to light activities, focusing on his upper body and taking long walks in place of his usual, intense cardio. He diligently iced his knee and elevated it several times a day. But the worst part? The emotional toll. He wasn't used to being sidelined. As the days went by, though, Jake started to notice subtle improvements. The swelling in his knee went down, and the pain lessened. It was a slow process, but there was light at the end of the tunnel. On one of his walks, he reflected on how far he had come in his journey, not just physically but emotionally. The setback, though frustrating, had taught him the importance of patience. The old Jake would have given up and let the setback define him. But the new Jake, the one who had learned to embrace slow and steady progress, wasn't going to let this injury control his path. The turning point came on a quiet afternoon, nearly 2 weeks after the injury. Jake was sitting on his couch, massaging his knee, when he felt a pang of determination. His knee was almost back to normal, and it was time to test it. He had been cautious with his recovery, but now he was ready to push himself a little. Slowly, Jake stood up and took a few tentative steps around the living room. No pain. A sense of relief washed over him. He then took a few more steps, then a small jog. His heart raced, not from exertion, but from the realization that he was healing. That evening, he sent Ellen a text, "I think it's time to get back in the game." Ellen responded almost instantly, "That's awesome, Jake. I'm so proud of you. Take it slow, though. Don't rush it." Her words of encouragement made Jake smile. He knew she was right. This wasn't about rushing to get back to where he was, it was about ensuring that his knee healed completely and strengthening it so it wouldn't get injured again. The past week had taught him that recovery wasn't just a break, it was part of the journey. The next morning, Jake returned to the gym. He wasn't going to jump into his usual routine just yet, but he did want to test his limits and see how his body felt. He started with a light warm-up on the treadmill, focusing on the way his knee moved with each step. It felt good, better than he expected. Encouraged, Jake moved on to some upper body exercises, making sure to avoid anything that would put too much pressure on his knee. He was surprised to see how much strength he had maintained despite the time off. By the end of the session, Jake was beaming. His knee had held up, and he hadn't experienced any pain. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. He was no longer sidelined by self-doubt. The road to recovery wasn't over, but he could see it ahead, and it felt like he was on the right path. In the following weeks, Jake took things one day at a time. He gradually increased his workouts, focusing on strengthening exercises specifically designed for his knee. He took care to listen to his body, never pushing too hard. Every workout felt like a victory, and each time he finished, he would reflect on the progress he had made. Ellen, who had started to build her own routine, checked in with him regularly. She was so supportive, always encouraging him to take his recovery seriously but also reminding him that his journey wasn't just about the physical transformation, it was about mental resilience, too. "You're doing great, Jake," Ellen said during one of their check-ins. "You've already come so far. Remember, there's no rush. You're not trying to impress anyone, you're just building a better version of yourself." Jake took those words to heart. Ellen had a way of framing things that made him feel grounded, focused. She was right, this wasn't a race. This wasn't about rushing to the finish line. It was about progress, even if it was slow. And slow progress was still progress. As the weeks passed, Jake's knee grew stronger. He resumed his normal workouts, more cautiously, more mindfully. He started doing mobility exercises specifically for his knees and hips, learning how to avoid movements that could lead to future injury. The careful attention to his body paid off. His knee remained strong, and his strength continued to improve. One evening, while Jake and Ellen were finishing a workout together, Ellen grinned at him. "Look at you, back at it. You're going to crush it this year." Jake smiled, feeling a sense of accomplishment that ran deeper than physical strength. "I'm just taking it one step at a time. But it feels good to be back." Ellen laughed, picking up a dumbbell and lifting it with ease. "You're not the only one crushing it. I've been feeling pretty strong myself." Who knew fitness could be so empowering? Jake nodded. "It's been a game changer. I didn't realize how much of my life was tied to my health, mentally and emotionally. It's like everything has just clicked into place." They both shared a knowing smile. It wasn't just about muscle and strength, it was about the mental shift that accompanied the physical progress. They were both discovering that health was a journey of self-discovery. It was about finding balance, about learning patience, and about being kind to yourself along the way. That night, as Jake lay in bed, he thought about how far he had come. The knee injury had tested his patience, but it had also given him a deeper understanding of his body. He had learned to listen to it, to rest when needed, and to embrace setbacks as part of the process. His fitness journey wasn't a straight line, it was filled with twists, turns, and bumps along the way. But with each challenge, Jake had grown stronger, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally, too. The road to recovery was often a slow one, but it was still the road to progress. And in the end, that was what mattered most. Jake was back on his feet. Literally. After weeks of recovery and careful progress, the knee injury that had once threatened to derail his journey was now nothing more than a distant memory. His knee was strong, his body was stronger, and his mind had reached a place of balance he hadn't thought possible before. As he stood in front of the gym mirror, taking in the reflection of his body, he couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. It wasn't just the physical changes that struck him. Sure, he had gained muscle, lost fat, and looked more toned than he had in years. But the real transformation had happened on the inside. His confidence had grown, his mindset had shifted, and he now saw every challenge as an opportunity for growth, not as an obstacle to overcome. But there was something more that had clicked into place, his nutrition. For months, Jake had worked hard to maintain a balanced diet, knowing that good nutrition was key to muscle recovery and overall well-being. He'd always been relatively health-conscious, but it wasn't until his injury that he truly understood the profound impact of nutrition on his progress. He had relied on Ellen's advice and the information from Elon Musk's tips on health, including the foods that promoted muscle health and longevity. Jake had paid attention to the details. He had increased his intake of protein, focusing on lean meats, eggs, and plant-based options. He had cut back on processed foods and sugars, focusing instead on whole foods, fruits, vegetables, and healthy fats. He had incorporated anti-inflammatory foods like turmeric and ginger to support his recovery, and he'd been more mindful of staying hydrated. But it was one specific food that he had recently added to his diet that had made all the difference. Mushrooms. Yes, mushrooms. It seemed almost too simple, but Jake had discovered that mushrooms, particularly varieties like shiitake, maitake, and reishi, had profound benefits for muscle health and immune function. These mushrooms contained compounds that reduced inflammation and helped regulate the body's stress response, which was especially important during recovery periods. The more Jake read about them, the more he realized how they fit into his new, holistic approach to fitness. It had been a breakthrough moment. He had been struggling to find the balance between training hard and recovering properly. But once he incorporated mushrooms into his diet, he noticed something remarkable: his recovery times were faster, his muscle soreness was less severe, and he felt more energized throughout the day. The decision to embrace these small, yet powerful changes in his diet wasn't just about looking good, it was about feeling good. His body was healing faster, his mind was clearer, and his overall well-being was improving. It was as though his body was finally functioning in sync, and he was reaping the rewards of his careful attention to both his physical training and his nutrition. One Saturday afternoon, Jake sat down with Ellen at their favorite cafe after a workout, sharing a smoothie bowl packed with chia seeds, berries, and mushrooms. He was excited to talk about his latest discovery. "You won't believe this, Ellen," he said, taking a sip of his smoothie. "I've been adding mushrooms to my diet, shiitake, maitake, and reishi. They're game changers for recovery. Seriously. I feel like I'm healing faster than ever." Ellen raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Mushrooms? Like, the kind you put on pizza?" Jake laughed. "Not exactly. These are different. These types of mushrooms are loaded with antioxidants, anti-inflammatory properties, and compounds that help with muscle recovery. I know it sounds strange, but I feel amazing." Ellen grinned. "You've always been on the cutting edge of health trends. I guess I need to start eating mushrooms now, too. What's next? Are we going to start meditating with crystals or something?" Jake chuckled. "Maybe. Who knows? But seriously, I've been feeling great. I think it's a combination of everything: the training, the nutrition, the rest. It's all coming together." Ellen nodded, clearly impressed. "I can't believe how far you've come. You're stronger, more focused, and healthier than I've ever seen you." Jake smiled, feeling a sense of pride wash over him. "It's not just about the body. It's about the whole package: mind, body, and spirit. When those things are aligned, that's when the real change happens." His journey wasn't just about building muscle or losing weight anymore. It was about building a lifestyle, a way of living that took into account every aspect of his health, his habits, and his mindset. He had learned that true fitness wasn't about the number on the scale or how much weight you could lift. It was about feeling good, being strong, and knowing how to nourish your body inside and out. That evening, Jake decided to push his limits. With his knee feeling stronger than ever, he headed back to the gym for a full-body workout. This time, he wasn't worried about the injury. He was focused on what he could do, not what he couldn't. Every exercise felt like an opportunity to prove to himself how far he had come. He started with his favorite move, squats. His form had improved drastically, thanks to months of focusing on mobility and strengthening his core. The barbell felt light in his hands as he moved through the repetitions, feeling the power in his legs and glutes. Next came deadlifts. Jake had always loved this exercise, and today, he was determined to lift heavier than he had before. His muscles screamed, but he powered through, adding more weight than ever. The challenge felt invigorating. With every rep, he could feel his body growing stronger, more capable. By the time he finished his workout, Jake was drenched in sweat. His heart raced, but he felt exhilarated. He had pushed himself, not just physically but mentally. His body had come through stronger, and his knee, the one that had once held him back, had never felt better. As he sat down to cool off, he thought back to the injury. It had been a challenge, but it had been the catalyst for his growth. Without it, he might not have fully embraced the power of nutrition, the need for rest, or the importance of a balanced approach to fitness. The injury had forced him to slow down, but it had also given him the space to build himself back up, stronger than ever. Jake's transformation had never been about perfection. It had been about embracing each stage of the process, learning from every setback, and making the changes necessary to keep moving forward. As he wiped the sweat from his brow, Jake realized that the hardest part was over. The road ahead was clear, and he was more than ready for whatever came next. The breakthrough wasn't just physical, it was a mental shift. He had learned to trust his body, trust the process, and trust that every step forward, no matter how small, was progress. The following months flew by for Jake. With each passing week, he felt stronger, more capable, and more in control of his health than ever before. The balance he had worked so hard to achieve between training, nutrition, and mental wellness had transformed not only his body but his entire outlook on life. What had started as a fitness journey had become something much deeper, a commitment to living well, no matter the obstacles that might come his way. But despite all the progress he had made, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. Every day felt like a step toward something more, but what exactly was that something? He had the physical strength. He had the knowledge. He had the community that supported him, like Ellen and his close friends. But there was one thing he hadn't yet fully embraced, the future. In the past, Jake had always lived in the moment. He focused on his workouts, on the meals he ate, on the progress he made every day. But now, as he stood in front of the mirror after another workout, the thought occurred to him, what would the future look like? Was this sustainable? Was he truly living the life he wanted, or was he just trying to keep up with the latest trends? That night, as Jake sat on the couch with his journal, he began to write down his thoughts. The questions he had about his future were swirling around his mind, and he felt the need to give them structure. What does my future look like? He wrote. What do I want to build? What do I want to leave behind? How do I want to continue living? As he put the pen to paper, he realized how much of his journey had been about survival. At first, it was about getting back to where he was, avoiding injury, and fighting through the pain. Then it was about recovery and healing, rebuilding his body after the knee injury. And now, it was about more than that. It was about growth, resilience, and creating a legacy. Jake wanted more than just a healthy body, he wanted a meaningful, fulfilling life. The next morning, after his usual workout, Jake met up with Ellen at their favorite cafe. They had been talking about a lot of things lately, work, life, future goals, but today, Jake was feeling particularly introspective. Ellen, I've been thinking, Jake started, stirring his coffee slowly. I feel like I've come so far, but I'm not sure what's next. I mean, I've got my routine, my training, and all that, but what does the future hold? Is this it? Ellen looked at him thoughtfully, her eyes reflecting the understanding of someone who had gone through similar questions. You've come a long way, Jake, she said softly. But you're not done yet. The future is about creating something bigger, something that can give your journey meaning. It's about living in a way that reflects who you are and what you want to become. Jake nodded, the words sinking in. But what does that mean? Do I need to change my goals again? I don't think it's about changing your goals, Ellen replied, but about finding new ways to evolve. Think of it like this, your body is only one part of your life. But what about your mind? Your heart? Your relationships? What do you want to build outside of your workouts? Her words made Jake pause. He hadn't thought about it that way. Yes, he had been focusing on his body, his fitness, his strength, but what about the other parts of his life? What about his career? His relationships? His purpose beyond just physical health? As he reflected on this, a new idea began to take root in his mind. Maybe his future wasn't just about pushing himself physically or sticking to a strict diet. Maybe it was about making a bigger impact, whether that was through helping others, sharing his story, or finding new ways to grow as a person. I want to do more than just train, Jake finally said, a sense of clarity beginning to form. I want to help others who've been through the same struggles. I want to share what I've learned, about fitness, about health, about recovery, and about what it means to rebuild after setbacks. Ellen smiled warmly. That sounds like an amazing plan. You've learned so much on this journey, Jake. Your story could inspire a lot of people. You're already making a difference in your own life, now it's time to share that with others. Jake sat back in his chair, feeling a wave of excitement wash over him. The future no longer felt uncertain. It felt full of possibilities. In the days that followed, Jake started to formulate a new plan. He began researching ways to share his knowledge with others, whether through online coaching, writing, or public speaking. He wanted to build a community, a space where people could come together and learn not just about fitness, but about resilience, about healing, and about how to live a balanced life. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Starting something new was always a challenge, especially when it involved stepping out of his comfort zone. But Jake had learned the value of discomfort during his recovery. He knew that growth didn't happen in the easy moments, it happened when you pushed past your limits and embraced the unknown. The first step was to create a platform. Jake set up a website and began sharing his story, his journey of overcoming injury, his commitment to fitness, and his belief in the importance of balance. He wrote blog posts, recorded videos, and began engaging with people who had similar experiences. Slowly but surely, his message began to resonate. As the weeks went by, Jake's platform started to grow. He received messages from people who were inspired by his story, who appreciated his honesty about the struggles he had faced. Some were dealing with injuries, others were simply trying to improve their health. But the one thing they all shared was a desire for change, and Jake was more than ready to help them achieve it. Through this process, Jake discovered a new sense of purpose. Fitness had always been important to him, but now, it was about so much more. It was about teaching others, empowering them to take control of their health and well-being. He wasn't just a guy trying to stay in shape anymore, he was a mentor, a guide, someone who could help others navigate their own journeys of transformation. As he sat in his office, looking at his website and reading through the messages of support, Jake realized that this was the future he had been searching for. It wasn't just about building muscles or hitting personal bests. It was about making a difference, about helping others find the strength within themselves to overcome their own challenges. His future wasn't just about what he could do for himself, it was about what he could give to others. And that, Jake realized, was the most fulfilling thing of all. It had been nearly a year since Jake first started his journey to reclaim his health. What had once felt like a personal battle to regain strength and overcome the setbacks of his past now blossomed into something far greater. He had found purpose in not only improving his own life but in helping others do the same. As Jake sat in his office one evening, reviewing the success of his online coaching program and reading through the latest messages from his clients, he felt a deep sense of accomplishment. He had gone from a man struggling with injury and uncertainty to someone who now helped others recover, grow stronger, and lead healthier lives. It was a far-reaching transformation, not just of his body, but of his entire life. The phone rang, pulling Jake from his thoughts. He glanced at the screen and saw that it was Ellen. "Hey, Ellen," he answered, a smile tugging at his lips. "Jake, I just saw the results of your latest online course. The response is incredible. People are saying your program has changed their lives." Ellen's voice was filled with excitement. "Really?" Jake asked, genuinely surprised. "I mean, I know it's been going well, but that's amazing to hear." "They're not just saying it, they're feeling it," Ellen continued. "Your story has become their story. The way you talk about recovery, about mindset, about growth, it's resonating with so many people. You're doing more than just teaching fitness. You're changing lives." Jake leaned back in his chair, letting her words sink in. He had always hoped to help others, but he hadn't realized the full scope of his impact until now. The program he had developed wasn't just a fitness course, it was a blueprint for resilience, a guide for people who had struggled with similar challenges to what he had faced. The workouts, the nutritional advice, the motivational support, it was all coming together in a way he hadn't anticipated. "I can't believe it's working," Jake said, a mix of pride and humility in his voice. "But I couldn't have done it without your support. You've been with me from the beginning." Ellen laughed. "You've done all the work, Jake. I've just been here to cheer you on. You're the one who put in the effort, and you're the one who made this happen. The difference you're making is real." Jake smiled, feeling grateful. The hard work had paid off, but what was even more gratifying was the ripple effect of his journey. He had learned how to push through the darkest times, and now he was helping others do the same. He was creating something that would last, a legacy. As Jake thought about the future, he realized that this wasn't just about a personal success story. This was about building a community, a movement where people could come together, support each other, and grow stronger, both physically and mentally. He had always believed in the power of human connection, and now he was witnessing that power firsthand. But there was still more to be done. Jake had recently been invited to speak at a health and wellness conference, where he would have the opportunity to share his journey and his message with an even larger audience. It was an exciting step, but also a daunting one. He had never considered himself a public speaker, let alone someone who could captivate a crowd. But this was the next step in his journey, a chance to reach more people, to make an even greater impact, and to solidify his place in the world of health and wellness. The morning of the conference, Jake stood backstage, his palms slightly sweaty. He was about to speak in front of hundreds of people, many of whom were experts in the field, not just everyday individuals. The pressure was on, and Jake felt the weight of it. But then, he remembered something, a mantra he had developed during his recovery: "You've come this far. You've overcome worse. Trust yourself." He took a deep breath, adjusted his tie, and walked out onto the stage. The bright lights momentarily blinded him, but as he looked out at the crowd, he saw something that calmed his nerves: faces of people just like him, people who had struggled, people who had fallen, but people who were ready to rise again. Jake spoke from the heart, sharing his story in the most authentic way he knew how. He talked about the knee injury, the frustrations, and the fears. He shared the lessons he had learned about nutrition, training, and mindset. He spoke about the importance of resilience, of trusting the process, and of always finding hope, even in the darkest moments. The audience was captivated. They hung on every word, nodding in agreement, taking notes, and even tearing up at some parts. Jake's story wasn't just motivational, it was real. It was raw. And it was relatable. When he finished, the applause was overwhelming. People stood up, clapping and cheering. It was a moment that felt surreal, like everything Jake had worked for had finally come full circle. He had gone from a man unsure of his future to someone who had found his calling. Backstage, Ellen was waiting for him. She gave him a big hug as soon as he came through the door. "Jake, you killed it out there. That was incredible." Jake grinned. "I wasn't sure I could do it, but once I started talking, it just felt right. It's like the story wrote itself." "You've got this," Ellen said, beaming with pride. "You've always had it in you." As Jake looked at the audience reactions online and read through the messages of gratitude, he realized that this moment was a turning point. It was the moment when he fully stepped into his purpose. He had always believed that health was more than just physical, it was mental, emotional, and spiritual. And now, he was sharing that message with the world. Jake's legacy was just beginning. The journey wasn't over, it had only just started. As he looked ahead, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. There would be challenges, no doubt. There would be setbacks and obstacles along the way. But he knew that the true measure of success wasn't how many times you fell, it was how many times you got back up. And Jake had learned that he was stronger than ever, inside and out. His legacy wasn't just about the muscles he built or the miles he ran. It was about the impact he made on others, the hope he inspired, and the lives he helped change. The future was waiting for him, and Jake was ready to meet it head-on. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?